Very excited to have my next guest join us. Her debut album, Punk, just dropped. It is Nyxen. Hey, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for doing this. I know it's a little early in Australia.
Yeah, it's pretty early, but thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here chatting to you.
Where in Australia are you right now?
I'm in Sydney, so the weather's just starting to kind of warm up here. It's been freezing and rainy and awful for months. But yeah, now it's kind of that beautiful kind of harbour city that everyone sees in the photos. So it's a great time.
I speak to so many Australian artists and people from down under New Zealand and so forth, and I'm like,
Mm.
one day I'm gonna go. And now hearing you talk about it, I feel like
You have to come.
I have to book that ticket ASAP.
Yeah, definitely. And like New Zealand's so stunning as well. My
Yeah.
family's actually originally from there, so it's a beautiful place, beautiful kind of part of the world.
Oh,
Definitely
nice.
make it down.
How often do you go to New Zealand?
Well, at the moment, it's pretty much whenever I do a show, but I've been lucky enough to kind of play a few shows over there recently. So I'm going back there at the end of the year for a few shows. So going to visit some family, do a little holiday while I'm down there. No, yeah.
Yeah, and I think from an outsider's point of view, they think, everything's all the same, especially from a musical point of view, that the music and influences are all the same. But I'm sure there is quite a difference, would you say?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. New Zealand are huge on drum and bass music and the bass scene. Very different to Australia. You only really get that in Perth in Australia. There are pockets elsewhere, but yeah, it's very different. And they also have this really cool kind of indie folk kind of scene in New Zealand. I think it comes out of Dunedin. I was digging through some music, just kind of searching and having a look. Aldous Harding came from New Zealand, so that sound really has a place there.
Yeah, I think especially during the last year or so, as we've been slowly getting out of the confines of the pandemic and kind of
Mm.
living life, and with a little hesitation, the music has become more joyful.
Yeah, definitely. I think yeah, it was a bit of a struggle for everyone there for a little bit. But now you're really starting to see people come back out, playing shows, and getting a lot of the music out that I think they may have been storing over the COVID period. Without touring, it's hard to kind of get that music out because you've got this body of work that you've worked so hard on and you can't play any shows. And so there were some artists that were kind of getting out there and putting it out. And then other artists, I've got some friends that were kind of doing a similar thing to me where we're kind of, keeping our music until we can kind of get it out.
Yeah. Well, the fact that you were kind of holding this album in a way until now to release it, it's been a long time coming. People are still learning about you, and you have all these influences, especially with the influences of the early aughts, like Mike Snow and MGMT, and then also the things that you grew up with, you've been playing all your life. Where do you think the itch to become an actual musician professionally come into play?
Oh, definitely. Probably when I was in high school, or maybe even before that. I used to beg my parents for a guitar when I was younger. This would have been primary school, so 12, 10 years old. They would never get me one. And then finally my mum gave up and she got me a guitar. And I was obsessed with it. Every single song that I heard and I liked, I would try and find out how to play that. And so I had a year of kind of traditional lessons, learning how to play like Mary as a Little Lamb and whatnot. And I was like, this sucks. So I just kind of like locked myself in my room, and every time I'd hear a song that I really loved.
What about the
But
music that was playing around your house? I'm sure your parents were kind of influential in a way in terms of like, I don't know, playing certain artists that resonated with you.
yeah, I mean, my parents, they loved like my dad's a big Shania Twain fan. So all the female kind of artists, he loved listening to them, Whitney Houston, Shania Twain, Shakira, like which is kind of a bit interesting. It's very different to my taste, and my mum's is very similar. But they did have this. My dad had this collection of CDs, and it was like decade CDs. And I used to, when I was really young, I used to sneak into his study and kind of grab the CDs and play them. And one of the CDs that I loved a lot, I loved the 90s and I loved the 80s. and it had yeah, so which I think you can hear a lot, and I would just listen to them, and then when I hear he's coming back, quickly put them away. Yeah, I think it was not a direct kind of they listened to this or liked this, so I kind of took that in. I definitely took in those songs, but I think it was more kind of scenarios we would be in. Like we used to do this thing on Saturday nights. We'd go get dinner, and then my dad would drive home, but he'd go around the city on the way home. And there was this thing in, like, you know, when I was growing up on the radio, it was called the Saturday Night Party Mix, which was just like 80s kind of party tunes and 90s party tunes. So you get like Euro dance from the 90s, and then, you know, Human League and stuff like that from the 80s. And I would just like stare out the window, looking at all these lights pass by, just listening to these songs. And those songs, like I still listen to them all the time. I'm a sucker for that kind of era and those kind of sounds, which I think you can probably hear in my album. So I think my parents' taste in music had an influence in that way. And then my sister, obviously, huge influence. Like everything she was listening to, I had to listen to as well. But that was, you know, The Used and that kind of punk band kind of, or not punk, but that kind of era of sound, My Chemical
Like the pop
Romance.
punk emo phase.
Yeah, yeah. She was a bit older than me, so she had the black hair and kind of like Emily Lestrange and stuff, and I was like, she's so cool. So yeah, like my sister had a massive influence on my music as well. I
The
think
way
you always kind of
the
absorb it.
picture you painted of you and your family driving around town paints such a romantic picture of innocence, and also this era of 80s music that just was so broad. Human League
Mm,
and a lot of the electronic new wave type of sounds were very fresh and new. And so that soundtrack with the backdrop of a cityscape,
mm.
especially at night, is something that's emanated throughout the decades.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I still, you know, when I am writing music, I still kind of will close my, I use imagery a lot when I'm writing. And I still kind of close my eyes and I think about what the music would sound like if you were in your car late at night driving through the city, you know, seeing all those city lights. I've always been a little bit of a mosquito for that, for those lights. So and that kind of that that picture.
Did you ever think that you would migrate or have an interest in country or folk or any of that when you picked up the guitar?
Um Folk, yeah. I th When I was first learning how to play guitar, I was obsessed with you know, Bon Iver, and am I saying that right? I always get that wrong. I feel like everyone gets that wrong.
Yeah.
Bon Iver, and Ben Harper, huge Ben Harper fan. So the original songs I was learning how to play, it was all like kind of finger plucking and acoustic based.
You mentioned your sister being kind of the one that was all goth in a way, I guess, emo,
For a time, yeah.
right? Panic at the Disco, Fall Out Boy, My Chem, Paramore. There must have been a period of time when those bands played a role in your music taste.
Yeah, absolutely. I think My Chemical Romance, one of their albums, I had like a little what are they called? Walkman. Because
Hmm.
I think it was when MP3s were first coming out. This is when I was in primary school. I had a Walkman. I'd take it to school every day, and it would just have My Chemical Romance CD in there, and I just like have the headphones and listening. And I think my teacher, one of my sport teacher, was like, "Oh, what are you listening to?" And kind of listened. And they were like, "Oh," like very unexpected. No, yeah, I definitely have. I went through a whole kind of like Queens of the Stone Age. Um, I My sister gave me a lot of kind of I absorbed a lot of good taste from my sister, I think.
That's very interesting to hear about your sister's influence in the emo punk, pop punk sounds, because I hear a lot of that attitude and some of that influence melded into your music. And I think in a way it also is part of electronic music as well, right?
Well, yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, I think you can hear the kind of correlation because that was the progression of sound until, you know, where we are now today. You know, you had that period, and then you had the kind of indie electronic kind of moment, and then dance became more prevalent, and now we are where we are, where it's all just a massive melting pot. I think everyone's influenced by everything, and some really incredible sounds. So
what was the seed for coming to this point of the full piece of work as a debut album? Because you've released songs in the past over the number of years.
yeah, well, I think every artist wants to release an album at one point. And when, this idea for an album first kind of popped up, I was playing around. I'm not sure. Can you see it in the background? Maybe.
Yeah.
No, you can't. My Prophet in the background.
Okay.
Is it
Yeah.
there? Yeah, so I've been playing around with sounds on that, and the sounds that you get out of that are very electric and kind of they have those 80s kind of sounds because Prophet obviously. And so I was tinkering around with sounds, and they were just really, what I was getting out of it was just really interesting, and I thought it would be worth exploring those sounds in a deeper way, in a more full kind of way. And that's how the album kind of was created. I think one of the first things I did was I was tinkering around with this kind of ARP sound. I was like, that sounds great, record that. And that ended up being the first few seconds of Punk, the song, the single. And so when I kind of started that process and just putting down the ideas for that song, I wrote on my whiteboard, or like I was just like cyberpunk. This is the kind of word, and that was what the album was going to be called originally, and then I shortened it to punk. And I just kind of started writing words underneath that, and some of those words are still the song titles on the album.
Was there a concept to the album in terms of creating this world? And if we listen to the songs in the order that they're in, are we on a journey somewhere?
Yeah, so when I first wrote Cyberpunk, the idea was to create music for the future that was envisioned in the 80s. That was the kind of idea. I was like, what would that world that they pictured, like high tech, low life, Blade Runner, Tron, kind of those kind of visuals. I was like, what kind of music would be played in that world? And so that's why a lot of the kind of inspiration comes from, those sounds, those soundtracks. John Carpenter is an artist. I love his movies. I love his music. So very influenced by that kind of sound.
This is a fantastic debut. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
One last question. Punk, PXNK is how you visually see it. What was the thought process in using that type of spelling and that representation?
Well, it was originally called Cyberpunk with the X, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to shorten it to Punk. But because I was so used to seeing Punk written with an X, I didn't even think that it could be interpreted in any other way. But the X was just, I think a lot of the things I kind of do, words and the way letters are kind of like synthetic, the way that it's written and the letters that are used in it aesthetically kind of match this world that I'm kind of creating. And I thought that the X kind of matched that kind of aesthetic, I suppose. And yeah, I didn't think that maybe people wouldn't know it's called punk and they'd think it's whatever else.
Right?
Punk,
Yeah.
pink, punk.
Congrats on the release of this. It's been a long time coming, and I can't wait for the live interpretation, more videos. Whatever TikToks people will start making now once they grab these sounds, and
Yeah,
people.
interesting. It'd be cool to see what kind of comes out of it. I'm keen to see what people kind of make up, and yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting.
it
Yeah.
is. It is. Well, congrats on that, and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.